I'm assuming you can hear me fine, yes. So my name is Emma McGrattan. I'm from Ireland, and I've been at Actian for 33 years, which is really hard for an Irish person to say, because our THs are impossible. So 33 years at Actian, and recently appointed CTO. Before that, I led engineering and product. The first time I was in Boston was the summer of 1987, and at that time I worked at the Lab for Artificial Intelligence at MIT. I was doing filing and answering phones, but it's amusing to me that AI is going to bookend my career, right? Started in the very beginning of my career learning what AI was all about, and I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, AI is going to be all-consuming, and it's going to take over our lives in ways that we can't even anticipate up today. Hopefully for the good, but certainly we know for the bad and the ugly as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can master data governance to ensure AI success. Because when we think of governance, we often think of it as being very cumbersome and getting in the way of innovation. And what we need to be able to do is to rethink governance and re-implement governance in a way that we think of it as the guardrails for innovation, right? That we protect the business, but we maximize the ability in the teams to innovate. I don't know if you guys have been following what happened at Coinbase and the fact that they had a major governance snafu today, right? Well, it happened this week, they announced it today. But basically they had some contractors that were working in support in India, and these contractors were paid by some rogue agents to deliver to them some customer data. So the rogue contractors were able to get into the system and get PII data. They were able to export that data, and they were able to sell it on to the rogue agents, who then went on to demand a $20 million ransom from Coinbase. Coinbase said, we're not going to do that. We're going to put a $20 million reward in place for whoever will lead us to the rogue agents that perpetrated this bad act on the business. The business was about to go public, and I'm sure that that's going to be delayed for some time. But it re-emphasizes for me the importance of getting governance right. So it was unfortunate for Coinbase, but good reminder that getting governance right is incredibly important. Identifying our confidential and private information, making sure that it's secured from rogue actors, putting simple things like obfuscation in place. So instead of seeing a social security number, you just see enough to be dangerous, right? That last 4 digits. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about governance in the terms of AI. And the use of AI across the organization. Because what we've seen is what I call the AI mirage. And if you were here for Paige's session, you'll have heard her talk about how GenAI is not what it's all about, right? There's multiple different uses of AI across the industry. We're seeing a huge adoption of agentic AI in our customers. We also see RPA, right? Automating anything that a person can typically make mistakes at because it's repetitive and boring, putting AI in place in place of humans, so you can free the humans up for higher value tasks. Because we're capable of thinking and interpreting context that's not necessarily provided to us or written out for us in a way that AI can't do. But when we think about organizations, a lot of the executive leadership and board level people think that AI is this panacea that's going to result in amazing business outcomes, but without having to do a whole lot. Just unleash AI on the world, and our business outcomes are going to change. And obviously, that's not the case. AI outcomes are only going to be as good as the data that's feeding them, the governance that we have in place on that data, and the organization's preparedness for AI, right? How we get an organization that's even data literate, right? Every organization today needs to have data literacy as a really important initiative that they're driving across the company. Data literacy needs to be fun. I play Duolingo every morning. I'm learning French. I'm on day 264. And I'd love to have like a data lingo, a game where I can have people within our organization in the supporting functions become more data literate, to understand what it is that we're talking about. And then beyond that, to become AI literate, right? So that they understand how the world is moving very fast and how they can benefit from it. It's simple things like being able to use, we were in GWS, and you can have GWS polish your email. You can have it sound like I'm a little bit more fun, sound a little bit more professional. You can have it work on your email so that they kind of raise the level of your game in the eyes of the person that's receiving your email. You can also ask AI to write an email for you from scratch. Just describe what it is you wanted to write, and then you can prompt it with being a little more professional. You can also have AI review a document for you, right? Summarize the document. I'm not going to read a 40-page document. Give me a one-page summary. Outline the action items that need to be taken, put the assignments in place for these action items. But the AI isn't going to know that nobody wants to work with Keith, so don't give Keith the most important task. John and Michelle just broke up, so let's not put them together on a task. AI doesn't have those contexts, so we continue to play a role in this, but the mundane tasks that we've been given in the past can be allocated to AI, and then you can free yourself up for delivering value to the business. So what we're seeing in many businesses is that they really want AI to succeed, but they're not putting in the work to get the foundations just right. So we think about things like data quality. Hugely important that we get data quality right, and a lot of people are looking at that, right? The accuracy of the data we're working with, the completeness, the timeliness. There's no point in trading in stocks or currencies today in using data that's even 5 minutes old. Everything is so dynamic and changing so quickly that we need to make sure that we're working with up to the second data, up to the millisecond data in some instances. So getting that data right, putting the right governance around it, making sure that the people that need the access to the data are provided with the appropriate level of access to the appropriate data, and that you're enabling them to get their job done, and that governance isn't getting in the way of that. Augmenting the metadata that we're collecting with information that makes it much more usable. Who's using this data? What's its business context? How's the data being used within the business? What are some of the key terms in here that we should understand? Do we have a business glossary that explains it? I have an engineering team that have spent their careers working on databases. They don't know that SQL in the business context means a sales qualified lead. They think of it as a query language. So understanding the data and understanding how it's being used is fundamentally important. We think about hallucinations, and there's many examples of hallucinations in AI outcomes. And hallucinations, the biggest problem with them is they're very difficult to detect because hallucinations can be very, very, very specific. We've all heard of these cases where lawyers took a shortcut and they had AI do their homework for them, right? AI wrote the documents that they were submitting to court to put together their argument for their case. It had citations within there that didn't exist. It listed case law down to what court, what judge heard it, on what date. It didn't exist. It was wholly made up. So hallucination is going to continue to be a problem. And what we need to be able to do is to empower the people within our business with a level of curiosity about the data and a level of understanding of the data that they can more easily identify hallucinations where they to happen. I mean, the ultimate goal is to have data that's so clean and so accurate and so well governed that we're not going to have hallucinations. But until we get to that point, hallucinations are going to be a fact of life, but it's one that we're going to have to enable our teams to identify and to flag it, right? If I'm seeing hallucination, let's raise my hand and say, what's gone wrong? Is there a broken data pipeline that's leading to this? And if there is a broken data pipeline, then let's make sure we can identify and fix it. Ideally, this all should be automated. The next thing we've seen as a big problem is that we've seen a ton of successful AI programs rolled out internally in sandboxes, but very few of them get rolled out to production. I was at Gartner before this event, and what I learned at Gartner is that 60% of AI initiatives, not just GenAI, but AI initiatives generally, are not going to roll out to production through the end of 2026. So what that means is only 1 in 3 AI projects is going to be successfully rolled out to production at enterprise scale through the end of next year. To put it in context, if you look to your left and look to your right, one of the 3 of you is going to have a successful project. It's staggering to me. We're putting so much emphasis on this. There's so many companies investing massive budgets in AI, and we've got to enable them to get it right. We've also seen that a lot of people are putting shiny interfaces on their applications. The fancy UI layer, this really smart bot agent that's going to answer all your questions and help get your job done. It's going to automate a lot of the tasks that have been previously assigned to you. Unless those agents get the data right, they're not going to be successful. So it doesn't matter how shiny and new they look, the fundamental data layer needs to be right for them to be successful. And then finally, model-centric thinking is what we've seen across a lot of organizations, where they think that the model is the be-all and the end-all. And unless we've got the data and the governance that's underpinning those models right, we're going to continue to see hallucinations and we're going to continue to see problems with the model outcomes. It's all about getting the foundations right. So let's talk about the data governance paradox. Because to get all of this right, we need to get governance right. The way I think of it is, data quality is important, but data quality without governance is not going to lead to success. So if we think about data quality, I have an analogy I like to use. I'm trying to prepare a world-class meal. I go out and I get the best oysters that Boston has to offer. I get a hand-reared, corn-fed, organic chicken. I get some artichokes. Now imagine that's my high-quality produce, it's my high-quality data. Imagine I've got no idea how to work in a kitchen. Imagine I've got no idea about cross-contamination. I mean, do we have botulism? Do we have salmonella? Do we have death potentially, right? So think of that understanding how a kitchen works, understanding food preparation, understanding recipes. Think of that as your governance. And without getting the governance right, it doesn't matter how good your data is, it's going to result in catastrophic failure. So the data governance paradox is all about the fact that we need governance, right, to put the guardrails on innovation. But most organizations view governance as an overhead required for compliance and not as an enabler for innovation. And that's the paradox. We need to switch our thinking so that governance no longer becomes a burden, but rather becomes an enabler for innovation. We need governance that's easy to use, right? One of the challenges that we've had with the first two generations of governance solutions is that they're incredibly difficult to use. And because they're difficult to use, large organizations bring in armies of consultants to implement them. And armies of consultants come in and nobody likes them. Nobody wants to talk to them. Nobody wants to have lunch with them. Everybody wants them just to get their job done and get out of there. And the problem with that is there's no ownership. You wind up with a governance solution that nobody feels a part of, that nobody owns. And as a result, it's there for compliance purposes, but rarely gets extended to new use cases. As we move forward, the importance of governance cannot be overstated, right? Every AI project is going to need data that's accurate, data that's of high quality, data that can be trusted. But to trust the outcomes of AI, we need that trustworthy data that has governance in place around it. We've also seen with a lot of governance solutions is that they can be overly restrictive. So if you want to get to the data that you need to answer a question for the business, maybe you can't get to it in the systems because the governance is too tight. Governance that's too weak is another problem, right? And exactly what Coinbase have experienced. But to get that governance just right is so important because if we don't do that, we're going to wind up with shadow systems where people are getting data from wherever they can get it, right? That's ungoverned data, and ungoverned data is going to mean that we have disastrous outcomes from our AI. I firmly believe that we can deliver on governance frameworks that are trustable, right? Because without trust in the governance, we can't trust the outcomes of AI. That are flexible. So not only can they handle today's use cases and our new and emerging use cases, but the use cases of 18 months from now. I can't anticipate what the next 18 to 24 months is going to hold when it comes to data use cases and AI use cases. So I need a governance solution that's going to grow with me and that's going to be flexible enough that it can handle use cases that I can't even think about today. And finally, we need to think of governance as a living, breathing project. It's not a one-time thing, right? We've got new types of data, new data sources being added to the ecosystem all of the time, new use cases for existing data. So the governance needs to be a living, breathing thing within our organization. It needs to be built into every data interaction that we have within the business. So I'm a big believer in governance by design. That is governance that's baked into the DNA of every data interaction that we have, and that's not bolted on after the fact. I really, really appreciate data products. Is anybody here using data products? Okay, well done you. So we don't have a ton of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with data products, but Data products, to me, are a means through which we can deliver data assets to the business that's governed. So when I talk to the enterprise, typically, enterprises have been on the market for years, so they have data technologies of many generations. We talk to financial services firms that are still running mainframes, right? And they'll have everything from mainframes through to Kafka streams and IoT edge devices. And what they want to do is to enable a modern governance framework, and data products are a way of doing that and not forcing you to go through a transformation project, right? So data management transformation projects are risky, they're expensive, they take a long time. People need to be more nimble, and data products is a way of allowing you to adopt modern governance frameworks to deliver on innovation in the enterprise without having to boil the ocean to get there. I also think that when it comes to policy enforcement, that really important to have a centralized governance body, and they should set the centralized governance policies, but that each business domain is where policy should be set for that domain. So the marketing people know how marketing data should be used. They should have somebody within the marketing department that's responsible for governance for marketing data. That person within the marketing department has domain expertise. They understand what data you can feed into marketing campaigns. They understand what it means to provide quality data to a marketing campaign. In a marketing campaign, 90% data accuracy when it comes to email addresses is typically okay. In the finance department, 90% accuracy is catastrophic. Right? In the finance department, you need 100% accuracy 100% of the time. So allowing each domain to have their expertise and to set their own policies and to enforce those policies means that we don't have a bottleneck in the central compliance and governance department, because every department now is dependent upon data. Every department now is trying to leverage data as much as they can. So you can't have that bottleneck in a central data office. You've got to enable each department to decide what's the best for their department. They've got the domain expertise, let them set the policies and let them have the accountability should things go awry. I also believe that we need a ton of automation here, right? Governance tasks like documenting metadata, right? Anything that can be automated, anything that is boring for humans to do, they're going to make mistakes at. So free them up to deliver on higher value tasks. Automate as much as you can. I also believe in transparency. I mean, one of the things I respected about what Coinbase did today was they were very transparent in how this happened and what they're doing to remediate it. Right? So if you're transparent in your governance, if you can track the lineage, right? If I'm looking at a report and I want to understand, maybe it's productivity of my developers, right? How are they measuring productivity, right? If it's measured by lines of code, I don't care, because anybody can game that system, right? You can have massive comment blocks in every line of code that you write. So, how are we coming up with these metrics? Really important to me to be able to get to the root of where that metric's coming from, so then I can determine how much trust I'm going to put on a given metric. And then obviously it needs to scale, because as the enterprise scale, if the use of data scales, we've got to make sure that the governance policies that we have in place and the mechanisms through which we're rolling it out can scale as well. And then finally, a big believer in empowering users. So trust our users and give them with data that's trustworthy. Give them the access to the information that they need to answer questions for the business. But make sure that in doing so, that you've identified which is the data that should be protected. So if there's PII data in there, then it's incumbent upon you to put the restrictions in place that prevents them from accidentally saying something that they shouldn't, giving them access to full credit card numbers or social security numbers. If they just need the last 4 digits to make sure that there isn't a mistake and this is in fact the person that they're dealing with, then that's all that should be exposed to them. So being able to identify and treat PII data responsibly is incredibly important. But I love the idea of empowering everybody who's making a decision for the business with access to the data that they need to make that decision, and to give them data they can trust. Because if you give me the data, I'm going to use it. If I shouldn't be using parts of that, then let me know. And if we get our governance right, it enables a lot of goodness in the organization. AI readiness is probably the most important thing for the business, right? So if we have data quality and data governance done right, then we've got the ability to innovate when it comes to AI. We've also got data that we can trust. And when it comes to AI, garbage in, garbage out. And as I mentioned earlier, the problem with garbage AI outcomes is that it's very difficult to recognize hallucinations. They come across as very compelling and very, very specific. So, making sure that we can trust the data and trust the outcomes of our AI is going to be enabled by good governance. We also have the ability, because we can trust the data, because we don't have to ask questions of the outcomes that we're getting, we have faster time to insight, right? We've got good governance, we can trust the data, we can trust that we're making the right decisions for the business. Self-service analytics is something that we've promised for over a decade now. Right? We all talk about data democratization and how everybody who's making a decision for the business should be empowered with all the data they need to make that decision. But it's really, really hard. Right? If you're a Salesforce user, and if your company's a Salesforce user, and I gave you access to all of the Salesforce data that we have, what could you do with it? How would you even make sense of it? So for me, true data democratization comes when you can have a conversation with your data. When I can ask my data, tell me why are sales in the Northeast dropping when we're investing more money in marketing this quarter? I'm not looking for a number. I'm looking for the context. Why are my sales failing, right, when I'm investing more money in marketing? So to get to that answer, it needs access to a whole bunch of different systems. It needs to be able to pull all of that information together and give me the answers to why my sales are failing. Could be multiple different reasons, right? That's true data democratization. When you can have that conversation with your data, when you don't have to speak in a sort of a semi-SQL-like language to ask questions and get answers, but rather to have a conversation with the data. And that's where we're going to get with good governance and with high-quality data. I also believe that data products are incredibly important going forward, because with a data product, you have a data contract, and we'll talk about that in a moment, that sets up the terms under which that data is going to be provided. So you understand that that data is governed and exactly how it's being governed as part of the provision of the data product to the business. It also enables reuse, because you've got a trusted data asset that you know can be used and reused. And then operational efficiency. So now we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Now, if I'm looking for a specific report on sales in a specific geography, I have the ability to discover that data asset, and I have the ability to reuse reports. So really important that we get our governance right, because it really enables a whole bunch of benefits to the business. So what are some of the tools that we can use to get AI-ready data? First off is data contracts, and I probably should have introduced this concept before data products. So data contract is an agreement between a data producer and a data consumer as to the terms and conditions under which that data is going to be provided. For us techies, you can think of it as a YAML file, because that's what it is, right? And it sets up the conditions under which the data is going to be provided. It's going to provide the quality terms under which you're getting this data. It's going to give you the format under which the data is going to be received, and potentially some sample data. If the data contract covers a data set, it will show you the query that's going to be used to generate that data set. And data contracts, just like regular contracts, can have, legal contracts can have addendums to them. So the contract becomes a living document. And as the contract is changed over time and evolves over time, so too do the data products that are defined by that contract. So data products you could think of like software products. They have versioning. They have a requirements gathering phase. They have a development phase. They have a test phase. They get rolled out to production, and eventually they get retired. So it's a kind of a CI pipeline for data products, and it leads to reusable, high-quality, trustable data products that can be used across the business. Data observability serves a couple of functions in making sure that we have AI-ready data. The primary one that I use it for is for data quality, right? So data observability is constantly monitoring the quality of the data and the data pipelines in the business. And if something should go wrong, it'll provide an early alert so that we can hit the stop button and say, this data pipeline is broken. Let's make sure that we can, maybe we're mismatching the tables that we're joining. Let's make sure that we can address that and then resume data operations. So data observability can be used to, you can set thresholds on your data. I want the data quality to be within these particular thresholds. If it drops below 90%, I'm not going to continue to pay for a marketing campaign that's got poor quality data, so at that point I want to shut off the campaign. We can also use data observability to ensure that we're adhering to the terms of the data contract. So if the data contract says this data is going to be refreshed every 2 hours, right? If I'm not refreshing that data, then there's a problem. I'm not meeting the terms of the contract, and the data observability engine can flag the fact that we're non-compliant with the contract. It's another really important tool if you're going to get AI right and prepare AI-ready data. A data quality dashboard is something that we see repeatedly in organizations, right? Where you've got some reason to put large screens in a data center, right? And they have all of these data quality graphs, so you can see how data quality is changing over time. So if data quality starts dropping off, obviously you need to investigate immediately, see what's going on. I really believe in federation. So we talked already about federation of governance, right? Where we have a central body that's responsible for core governance policies, and then you push out governance to the different business functions. So the marketing people do the marketing governance and set the policies for that. In terms of building data catalogs, I also think that federation is the way to go. That you can start with small projects, see success there, and then grow it out. And by having a federated catalog, you don't have to try and boil the ocean. Again, start small, see success, gain some confidence, and then build it out across the organization. So federation of the data catalog is something I really believe in as well. Data lineage tracking is really important from a compliance perspective. This is where we started with lineage. It was looking at things like BCBS 239, where you want to point at an element in a report and say, show me where that source system, where that came from, and show me that it hasn't changed along the way. But data lineage becomes increasingly important now as we're asking questions of our AI, right? When it comes to AI, I always believe in trust but verify, right? If I think that my data quality is there, I think my data governance is there, I want to see where it came up with these answers. And lineage is a way of helping me to understand how it came to the decisions that it came to. When I think about, systems that are getting lineage right, I think things like LinkedIn, right? Where LinkedIn will show me an ad for a job. I'm not looking, right? But it shows me an ad for a job, and I'll be like, why did you think that this was a good fit for me, right? So why am I seeing this? And then it'll show you why I thought it was a good fit for you. Netflix does a good job too, right? When it recommends movies to you, it'll say, why do you think this is a good movie for me? Because you watched this, this, and that, right? We think that you'll also enjoy this. So it might be based upon stars in the movie, the theme of the movie, whatever it is. But I think they do a really great job of explaining how they came up with the answers they came up with. The semantic layer is something that I think is going to be incredibly important for that version of data democratization that I described. We're having a conversation with the data, where you're not looking for a number in an answer, you're not looking for a specific answer, but rather to understand a broader context. So as your AI is building out, as your governance solution is building out a semantic layer for your AI, it's examining all of the data assets you have across the business. So not only is it scanning all of the tables that you've got within your various data stores, but also looking at things like the reports and the dashboards and the applications that are built upon that data. How are they referring to that data? How is that data being used in the business? So a true semantic layer that's enriched with context is going to enable those conversations with the data. The other thing that I love about doing semantic layer right is that instead of having to hardwire a semantic layer for things like Power BI versus Tableau or whatever you may be using, now we could have a single semantic layer that can be plugged into any of those tools. So you can say, show me a Power BI graph that shows my sales by geography, by market vertical, whatever it may be. But having that semantic layer and getting it right, I think is something that's going to be game-changing, right? Because that's going to enable conversations with the data. And up until now, those conversations have been very clunky, but they've also required that somebody spends a lot of time hardwiring the semantic layer for it. And we can't afford to do that and to innovate at the pace at which we need to. So having a governance tool that will build in that semantic layer is important. And same with the business glossary. Filling out a business glossary is something that today, data stewards will spend a lot of time going over, because the governance solution will come up with, here's a list of terms that are used consistently across your business, and then here's the definition. Typically, the data steward has to write in a lot of those definitions, because the definition of something like a customer, right? If you trust that to something like ChatGPT, you're going to wind up with a very generic and very meaningless definition. If you want to hit, what does a customer mean in a specific context, then you're going to have the smarts built into that semantic layer and that glossary to understand exactly what it is that you're talking about. And then finally, the data marketplace. So think of the data marketplace as being very similar to the Amazon marketplace or any of these e-commerce marketplaces. But instead of having products that we like to buy in there, we'll have our data products. So you'll have a list, and it will be data sets, it might be joins, it might be dashboards, reports, it could be a myriad of things. So they'll be listed out, so you'll search for something, it will do a ranking in the same way that Amazon does a ranking. We won't have sponsored content, I hope, but you'll have a listing of all of the relevant assets ranked based upon you. They know you as a user. And then based upon your utilization of those assets, it will suggest other assets that could be important to you. So it'll say, people that enjoyed that report also looked at these data sets, reports, or whatever it may be. That becomes important. Also the ability to review data assets, right? So you could say, tried to use this, it was rubbish, right? 1 star. You've got the ability to do that within your data marketplace. So then you wind up with understanding what are the most important assets to the business, and let's make sure that we get those right. So this is just some of the tools that are really practical to be used for preparing AI-ready data and to getting your organization ready for success with AI. But we continue, because compliance solutions are very cumbersome to use, we continue to think of governance as a burden and not as a competitive advantage. But if we get governance right, we wind up with faster AI innovation happening within the business, because we've put the guardrails in place. So now there's no limits to the speed at which the teams can move. We've put stronger customer trust in place because we're very transparent about how we're using their data. I've seen a lot of banks doing this of late, where they will put the models that they're using for things like providing loan recommendations or credit card limits. They're putting the models out there for anybody to review them. I don't think many of their customers can actually take full advantage of that, but it won't be long before we'll be feeding those models into AI and asking it, what are some of the weak points in here? Thinking specifically about the Apple Card, right? When Apple and Goldman Sachs got together and released a credit card, what their customers found was that their male customers were getting 20 times the spending limit as their female customers, even with identical jobs, identical salaries, and identical credit ratings. And what happened was that Apple had trained their AI that was making the recommendations on credit limits on their historical lending patterns. So they had historically been biased against women, and that was showing in the algorithm. So again, reputational damage that was done by that was quite catastrophic, but they've since had to open up the AI, show exactly how they're making these decisions and making sure that there isn't bias built into them. We have a long way to go before everybody is AI literate and can make sense of that. But I'm hopeful that the few people that can make sense of these models will be able to identify bias and call them out on it. But it is a great first step, right? Providing that transparency shows that they believe that they're doing the right thing in the models that they're using and that they've trained it on data that's free of bias. So we'll have to just trust that they're doing the right thing. The next thing we've got is that we need to be more proactive when it comes to compliance. So always being reactive means always waiting for problems to happen and then fixing them after the fact. Let's identify where problems are coming in and be a lot more proactive in solving for them. That's going to turn governance into something that is less of a chore and more of an enabler for innovation. We also want to streamlined data access. So one challenge with governance is that we can be overly restrictive. The opposite side of that coin is that we can be too lenient. So getting it right, getting someplace in the middle is very important. I think the days of having to request access to data sets and it generating a JIRA ticket that goes to IT, then IT then finds the data owner and the business owner and decides whether or not you should have that. Those days should be behind us very soon. And all of this should be streamlined with automated workflows where you could say, I need access to the data set. It will do, based upon your role within the company, it can decide whether or not you should have access to that data set and will enable you with access to the data that you should be seeing. And that will be streamlined so that we don't get in the way of innovation. Because there's nothing worse than trying to get your job done, then you've got to raise a ticket to get an access to something, because you move on to something else. So it kind of slows down that desire to innovate or to get something behind you if you've got to wait for access to be granted and then remember why you even wanted it within the first place. And then obviously, better data is going to lead to better decisions and better outcomes. So really important that we get that right, but also that we understand the context under which data is being used. So if we get governance right, it can become an enabler. It can become transformative, right? We want the business to succeed. We want the business to succeed with AI. Everything in this world is changing very quickly, and the winner in a space is going to be who gets it right first. So not who gets there first, because they may get there with some egg on their face, but who gets it right first can actually eliminate a lot of their competition because they will have all of the benefits of the machine power behind AI. So really important that we think about governance, data quality, and enabling our AI to be successful. If we think about 5 things in a checklist for our governance and getting AI data right, data contracts to me are fundamentally important because the data contract is that agreement between the data producer and the data consumer under which specifies the terms under which the data is being provided, the terms under which it can be used. Is this for internal use only? Is it external use only? Is there costs associated with using this data? Is there PII data in there and has it been obfuscated? How long is this data good for? It also has some accountability, right? It's up to the team that's providing the data to the data producer to make sure that the terms of the contract are being met. And that's the role that the data observability plays, right? Making sure that the terms and conditions under which this data is provided are in fact being met. Federated policy enforcement means that the teams that are responsible for the data, that understand the business context of the data, are responsible for enforcing the policy because they know it best. And if they get that right, then their part of the business can move very quickly and can trust not just the data, but the outcomes of their AI. Being able to see data quality, right? When you're looking at data to understand how good is this data in terms of its accuracy, in terms of its completeness, in terms of the timeliness. Am I making decisions based on last week's data? Has everything changed this week? Really important that we can understand the quality and then the lineage. Where did this data come from? What assumptions are we making? What transformations did it go through on its way into the report that I'm betting my business on? Observability, right? Understanding where the data is being used. Maybe there's new usage patterns for your data. I implemented Pendo within my products at Actian so I could understand how customers were using my products. What browsers were they using as they came in? Were they on a mobile device or were they on a laptop? Where were they getting stuck? Where were they spending most of their time? Where did they stop using the product? It was really important to me from a product management and engineering perspective to understand how my product was being used. But now our customer success team are using it because they want to understand what parts of the product are the customers not using. So now we've got that same set of data being used for a new use case, right? Is the governance policies that I have around that data sufficient for the new use case? It's really important that we understand that, right? Understand where the data is being used and by whom to understand that we've gotten it right. And then data drift, right? Understanding where quality may be drifting, understanding where processes may be drifting. Really important that our observability solution is able to pinpoint those challenges. And then finally, really important that we have the context of our metadata. So think of metadata as data about data. It's completely meaningless unless we understand the context, the business context under which that data is being used. So having this context-rich metadata to drive our AI means that it understands a lot more about the business and can make more informed decisions and hallucinate less. I always think of hallucinations as like if you've given your model data that doesn't have context, it's like giving your model a blindfold and putting it into a room and complaining when it bounces off walls. It's got to have the context to understand and to not hallucinate. And then finally, our takeaways. So first off, data governance isn't just about control, right? Certainly a part of governance is control. We need to make sure that PII data is protected, that we're complying with regulations like HIPAA, GDPR, and so on. But if we get data governance right, and it's lightweight, it enables innovation. And that, to me, is incredibly important as we move forward because all of our teams are data teams and they all need to innovate. So let's make sure that we put the guardrails on the data and that they can do that in a way that they can be safe. Second is we need to govern by design. So governance should be baked into every data interaction and not bolted on after the fact. And if we've governed by design, then we can use the data without risk and we can trust the outcomes of our AI. That trust is hugely important, but trust and verify, right? So providing that transparency so that we can ask questions. How did you come to that answer, right? Show me your work. Really important that we can ask those questions and that we have that transparency and that we have that ability to look at the underlying decisions that were being made before we make a recommendation to a customer or before we perform a business task. And then in the age of AI, governance is just essential, right? But for governance to be successful, we really need to encourage within our organizations that we build up this data literacy, this AI literacy, that we build out an organization that's data curious. Because in a lot of use cases today for AI, because of our fear of getting it wrong, we put a human in the loop. One example I'll give you is Irish revenue commissioners. I'm from Ireland, as I said earlier, and they're the taxing authority in Ireland. They're like the IRS. But Irish people don't like to pay taxes. I can't imagine many people do like to pay taxes. And Irish people would love to have an AI that was working for them, figuring out how to pay the minimum amount of taxes, right? Or to trick the AI into saying, oh no, you don't owe money, we owe money to you. Well, we'll send you a check in the mail. So revenue commissioners wanted some AI that was going to study all of the tax laws since the inception of the state over 100 years ago, all of the latest regulations when it came to tax, and to answer the taxpayers' questions in a way that would take a human a really long time to do. So what they decided to do was, instead of giving the taxpayer direct access to the AI, they put one of their agents in the middle of it, right? So it's their agent that then looks at the answer that's come back from AI. The answer is going to be very detailed and a very rich answer, but the tax employee is able to read that, make sure that it is in fact correct, and then they pass that answer over to the taxpayer. So they've designed this process to put a human in the loop until they have complete trust in the data quality, the governance, and in the Irish tax-paying population. But until we get to that point, I think it's important that you do keep a human in the loop. And I think there's many other use cases in which that human in the loop becomes terribly important. But I think AI is going to change the way we work. It's going to change our lives, hopefully for the better. But I'd like to see a lot more work being done on the ethics of AI. And it's something that I'm pursuing myself in my personal life because I think, as an enabler in this race to AI, it's really important that we make sure that the guardrails are on it ethically. So that's it from me. Thank you for your time.